This is the XL2540's OSD monitor from Benq, and it has the same exact OSD as the 2740 does, and I assume, with the exception of DIAC, so dynamic accuracy, Benq's new name for its strobing technology, which removes motion blur. So with the exception of that, I assume that the XL2546's OSD also looks the same as these monitors. And I would even go as far to say that the XL2735's OSD also looks the same. But those last two are just assumptions. I did have the 2740 and I do have this 2540, so I can tell you with 100% confidence that they do have the same OSD. As for the other monitors, I'm just guessing that they have the same one because they are in the same generation, and usually Benq uses the same OSD for each generation. For example, I also had a 2411Z and a 2720Z, which were older Benq monitors from the XL lineup, the gaming lineup, and they also had the same OSD. Right now I'm gonna reveal kind of a little secret. I've already shot the whole video, but it's pretty long, so for those of you who would just like to check out how the menu looks without all the explanation, the lengthy explanation I might add, I'm just gonna show it to you basically. So yeah, those people who don't care about my explanations and only want to check out the menu can see it in all of its glory without too much chatter in the background. Yes, I'm gonna go into the sub-menus and show you how they look like. With that out of the way, we can continue to the lengthy part of this video where I explain everything, at least everything that I found interesting. If you press one of the OSD buttons, you will be greeted with this screen. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 OSD buttons other than the power button. But I'm controlling the OSD from this hokey puck thingy. Which is pretty useful, by the way. These 3 buttons, these 1, 2, 3, are custom keys. You can set them in the settings, but what you can use here is pretty restricted. I'm gonna show you in a moment. This is the actual menu button and this is just the back button. So when you go into the menu, you'll be greeted with game settings. First off is the black equalizer setting. Of course, most of us do know what this is. This changes the gamma, but not on the whole image. It focuses on brightening up areas which are darker by default. It also makes stuff seem more greenish, by the way. It's really useful in games, in FPS titles. I couldn't comfortably game without it. I've gotten so used to it. This is a color vibrance settings, which you can substitute with the driver color vibrance settings in your NVIDIA display driver or AMD display drivers. But since you have this one, you don't have to bother with setting digital vibrance or saturation in the driver anymore. By the way, 15 is roughly equal to 100% digital vibrance in NVIDIA control panel. 20 is considerably more saturated, and the 10 is the default. Low blue light. This removes blue light from the image projected onto your shown on your screen. I don't know if my camera will catch this. Even more so on the background that I've selected for this OSD show off. I wanted a black background with a slight gradient to be able to focus on the OSD itself, but even like this, if I raise it up to 10 and then lower this setting down to 0, you can see how the whole screen turns more bluish. So on 10 it's more yellowish, and if I turn it down, the whole thing becomes more bluish. So yeah, instant mode is just a setting which doesn't even affect picture quality, and it will reduce input lag, so there is no reason to turn it off. I think it's just here in the menu to say to new customers who bought this monitor that yeah, we are focusing on reducing input lag, so you bought the right monitor if you wanted a fast and responsive monitor, which this by the way is. There's no reason to turn this off. It doesn't improve colors or anything like that. And after you fumbled around with all these settings and these settings as well, which I'm gonna show you, you can save them onto one of the 3 gamer profiles, which you can instantly access via this hokey buck thingy. So if you press 1 and if you press 2, you know what's the deal. So we go back, and by the way, this has a back button and input selector button, which doesn't activate if you're in the OSD, but if we go out, well, even then it doesn't activate, whatever. I haven't even used it, haven't even tried it so far. But getting back to the OSD itself, if we go into the second tab, the picture, here are all the presets you can select. You can scroll through them on this newer generation. On the older BenQ monitors, with each step you had to wait for the monitor to go black and then come back, because it would switch profiles as you would go down the list, and then the list would have even more profiles, even more useless profiles I might add, than this list has. So it's a really welcome change in the OSD that it doesn't switch presets when you scroll through them. You have to press the scroll wheel in to actually activate the preset. You can try all of these if you want to on your monitor. I would recommend sticking to... Well, on older monitors I would have recommended you to select standard and then customize it, and even on this newer one I do recommend that, but even if you customize FPS 1, you'll have a pretty good time. You won't have shitty colors. On the older generations of BenQ monitors, you did end up having shitty colors if you customized the FPS 1 or 2 or RTS presets into your liking. You had to customize the standard preset in order to get a good looking image on the desktop in the end. But on the newer generations you can customize the FPS 1 preset and you'll get a pretty good looking image. Brightness, self-explanatory. Contrast, again self-explanatory. What may not be self-explanatory is that on these newer BenQ monitors you have a lot more brightness than you did on the old ones, so lower numbers on this brightness setting will give you more brightness than they did on the older monitors. contrast, even contrast is stronger by default. I usually lower it down from the default 50 to like 38 or 35 even when I'm gaming. And this wasn't the case, by the way, with the XL2720Z, by the way. On that monitor I had to up the contrast to like 70, 75, the brightness to 100 all the way, and even then I wouldn't be able to see people as clearly as I am able to see on this monitor with like 60 brightness and 35 contrast. So yeah, these monitors have gotten a lot better. Gamma. This is a great setting. I mean, 2 and 3 look the best. If you're really hardcore, you can go with 2, which is really bright, but 3 would be the optimal middle way. 4 is over darkened and 5 is way over darkened. 3 seems the most natural, and 2 also seems natural but a little bit overly bright. 4 and 5, even though they might be better for movie watching, aren't really natural. If you go onto Facebook or Instagram and take a look at pictures with these gamma settings, you'll realize how unnatural they are. But I'm leaving it on 5 because I want the monitor to be pretty dim for this recording. Color temperature. This is again self-explanatory, though I find the normal setting to be a little bit too yellowish or greenish. And that's why I'm sticking to the bluish setting, which seems more clear to me. Well, it probably has more bias towards blue, but I still find it more neutral than I do with normal. And user define is just if you use user define and put it to 100, put all the RGB sliders to 100, it looks different than normal. It seems oversaturated and whatnot. I just realized that the image completely vanishes if I select user define, because I currently have 0 on user define with all sliders. So whatever. AMA. This is the overdrive setting of the monitor, which BenQ calls advanced motion acceleration, so AMA. High is the optimal setting. Off is just no overdrive, which creates too much ghosting. High removes like basically all ghosting, but adds a little bit of overshoot, which is really tolerable. It's really a minimal amount on this XL2540, and it also a minimal amount on the 2740, but it's a hair stronger on this one, the overshoot. As for premium, it doesn't do much more. It just adds more overshoot. It's not ideal. By the way, there's a menu, a factory menu in this monitor, which I'm also going to show you at the end of the video for those curious, in which you can play around with the overdrive gain setting. That means you can customize the overdrive to your liking. But it's finicky because it will go away if you switch picture modes or whatever. Let's just continue with the usual OSD, and at the end, if those really curious people stick around, I'm gonna show them the factory menu and the service menu as well. So dynamic contrast, blah, whatever. You can Google this. This dynamically changes the contrast, depending on the image displayed on the monitor. I don't use it, but you could give it a try. And not just the contrast, it also dynamically changes the brightness. Since I demo, this is kind of a janky looking demo. If you turn it on, the monitor gets split into 2, and one part of the monitor, apparently the right side, will stay the same as you set it up to, and the left side will become different. And I don't know whether the left side becomes like the standard, which how the monitor should look like, or it becomes, I don't know, a reference for a picture that a monitor without Sensei would give out. This is some kind of promotional stuff. Reset color, you can reset the color settings for all the profiles if you switch this to yes. Input. So these other options are grayed out. This is grayed out because we are not using an HDMI cable, HDMI RGB PC range. You have limited there and full. You can Google those terms. Sometimes you have to play around with it and select limited instead of full if you don't want excessive color banding. Overscan. This becomes available if you use a VGA connection. And the smart scaling. Let me go back into the menu. So smart scaling. Smart scaling. I don't know if it becomes available when you use a VGA cable or when you use a lower resolution, but we'll figure that out in a moment. So input, this is self-explanatory. I'm using a DisplayPort cable. You can select different inputs. By the way, yes, for those of you questioning whether you can use HDMI and achieve 240Hz on this monitor, yes you can, because HDMI 2.0 supports 240Hz at 1080p. This is a recurring question in the comment section of my videos. A lot of people claim that it is mandatory to use a DisplayPort cable, which I'm using, but it isn't. It isn't mandatory. With a DVI cable, I'm completely... what I know is that you can achieve 144Hz at 1080p with a DVI double link cable. With a single link cable it will be a lot slower. I can't remember the exact number, maybe 75, maybe 85 Hz is the maximum with a single link DVI cable at 1080p resolution. Whatever. And maybe you can achieve like 165 with a DVI cable, or maybe 144 is the complete maximum. I don't know the bandwidth of a double link DVI from the top of my head, but yeah. If you want 240Hz, you must use either DisplayPort or HDMI 2.0, which this monitor has. Display mode. Now this is an interesting one. If you select one of these, you can squish the image into the desired size. So if you're used to a 17-inch monitor, because you're an old school player or whatever, you can select that one and the monitor will squish your image, even your 1080p image if you so desire, the widescreen image, into the size of a 17-inch monitor. You see the border here? The whole image got squished. You can't really see it that well because I've selected the background for this video, which doesn't enable it to really show up. But if I exit out of here, you can see... Oh, come on. You can see the picture viewer in Windows, and that the image does indeed stay 1920 by 1080, but it gets squished into this 4:3 aspect ratio 17-inch screen size. So this is useful for old school players or people who would prefer to view a smaller image, like 21.5-inch size image instead of a 24.5-inch one, which this monitor is by default. So let's cover the thing I haven't covered with this section: smart scaling. So I'm gonna switch from 1080 to this resolution, click apply, and yep. So now we're gonna try whether smart scaling becomes available. Well, it doesn't become available. What a bummer. Let me try also using full no scaling in the NVIDIA driver. Hit apply and see whether it becomes available. It doesn't become available. So that will be a mystery for the future, whether or not it becomes available. If you use a VGA cable or if you have to use something else, whatever, I don't really care. So the last one is system. Yeah, there's a headphone pass-through on this monitor. You can receive audio from your HDMI cable to your headphones if you connect them via this jack here, and there's also a microphone jack. But although you can receive audio from your HDMI cable or DisplayPort cable and plug your headphones in here, if you want to also receive if you want to also send the microphone signals to your PC from this microphone jack, you must connect a audio jack cable below the monitor to the monitor, which runs back to your PC. So yeah, that's it for the headphone pass-through. You can set a volume, you can mute it, whatever. OSD settings, language, display time. This is how much time the OSD will get displayed even when you don't do anything with it. OSD lock, self-explanatory, custom keys. I've explained the custom keys. When you go out from the menu, you have these custom keys and you can set them up. And I told you that the monitor is pretty restrictive in terms of letting you set up the keys, because for the first custom key you can only have these two, picture mode and display mode. For the second custom key you can have these, and also there's something else down there. And for the third custom key you can have these. Information, self-explanatory again, other setting, which is not in plural, even though there are more settings than just one. Other setting. This is just the notice when you change resolutions, it's turned on. A buzzer, which is turned on by default, is this. When you do something in the OSD, it will make a sound. Input auto switch, when you plug something into the HDMI port, let's say I would plug something in, it would notify me because it's turned on. I mean, not notify me, but switch to the HDMI input. So if I plugged in, let's say, a PlayStation or an Xbox, it would switch to displaying that image instead of what I'm using right now, a PC from the DisplayPort input. Auto power off, this is self-explanatory. LED indicator, that's this one. You can make it brighter or less bright or turn it off completely. This is something that will let you control certain aspects of the monitor from software on your PC. If you want to use the Blur Buster strobe utility, for example, you have to turn this setting on. And this is self-explanatory again. If this regular OSD was all you were curious about, you can safely click away from this video now. But if you're also curious about the factory menu and the service menu, then go ahead and continue watching, because that is what I'm gonna show you. So let's start with the service menu, or the service page, which is seemingly the more user-friendly one, and the one that was kind of meant to be, not really, but kind of meant to be accessed by the end user. So if you get the first button here, it's not the one to press. If you get the second button here, that is the one to press. So you turn off the monitor, you press this button, hold it down, and then while holding it down you turn the monitor back on. It will reconnect to your PC, and when you press this button again, this menu will appear instead of the regular OSD. You can Google these, some of them are self-explanatory, whatever. The main focus of this menu for most of us will be these three settings. So on the XL2540 and on the 2740, they removed the blur reduction setting. Benq removed the blur reduction setting from the basic OSD. Because they want to sell their other monitors, which are more expensive, with DIAC or dynamic accuracy, that do have a blur reduction setting in their OSD, which is called DIAC now. Previously, it was only called, their blur reduction technology was only called Benq blur reduction. So they artificially removed the blur reduction from this monitor, for example, as to make the DIAC monitors seem like a better deal. But I don't know whether DIAC is completely the same as blur reduction is on this monitor, or if it has improvements over blur reduction on this monitor. I don't know. I haven't tested it, so I'm not gonna give any answer to that question. Although I would be curious to see whether there is a difference. So, the blur reduction setting, you can turn it on, and the monitor will again reconnect. And you see these moving lines? You can't see that with your own eye. Only my camera is capable of seeing that. This is black frame insertion or strobing on 240 Hz. If you're not familiar with these terms, I'm not gonna make the video last even longer. You can Google them. The intensity setting is bugged on this firmware, which is version 1. If you get a newer version with a newer firmware, the intensity setting will function correctly. What I mean by that is in version with the firmware version 1, the intensity goes from 25 to 1, but it only changes the brightness. So it's a no-brainer to have it on 1 if you're trying to game competitively. What's the problem is that it's supposed to also change the motion clarity. So when you really lower the brightness, you'll get better motion clarity, and when you up the brightness, you'll sacrifice motion clarity. It should work like that. I'm not gonna get any more technical. It should change strobing length, so the amount of time the black frames which get inserted with black frame insertion are shown. So whatever, the longer they are shown, the more, I'm gonna get more technical. The longer they are shown, they remove more motion blur from the image. The longer they are shown, those black frames which are inserted between the actual frames. But you'll also get less brightness, obviously, and vice versa. The brighter your monitor, the brighter... if you set the black frames to show for a lower amount of time, you'll get a brighter monitor but also more motion blur. The second setting, but on this firmware version, you only change the brightness by changing the intensity setting. And the second setting moves the crosstalk area, which I'm really not gonna explain here because the video is already pretty long. And that functions correctly. You can change the crosstalk area. By default it's on 10, and that's the best setting I found because that provides you with the least amount of crosstalk in the central area of the screen where your crosshairs is in shooting games like CS or Quake. So I would stick to 10. And if I want to use blur reduction, I use these settings. What's the caveat with all of this is that if you have the service menu on, you can't enter the regular menu. You can exit with the exit button, that is the one to the right, right beside the power button. But when you want to enter the menu, the service page appears. What you can do about it is that you turn off the monitor and turn it back on, and you will still have blur reduction turned on. But now you're able to also access the menu and change all various settings in case you want to. But you can't change picture modes, because if you do, blur reduction will go away. For example, I'm gonna change it to Gamer 1. And as you can hear, the monitor reconnects and you no longer see those moving lines on the camera, which means blur reduction is turned off again. And the service menu is not visible anymore. So that's the caveat. If you want to use blur reduction, you have to set your picture profile of your choice beforehand, and then enable blur reduction, and then when you have enabled blur reduction you turn the monitor off and then on again, and then you can have your OSD while using blur reduction. But if you change presets with these buttons or in the menu, blur reduction will get turned off. So it's finicky on monitors which do not officially support blur reduction anymore, but BenQ is a lot better. I mean, they did a lot better with hiding it as opposed to if they were to remove it completely from monitors which do not have dynamic accuracy. So in this way we can still use blur reduction on the cheaper monitors which do not have DIAC, even though it's a bit finicky. So the second special menu is the factory menu, not the service menu. And to access that, you push not the first, not the second, but the second and the third button at the same time, counting from the right side. Second and the third button, you push them down, and then with one hand you also press the power button because you're filming the video with your mobile phone. And if you did this and turned on the monitor, this exit button, the one on the right, will open and close the factory menu. And the funny thing with this is that, as you can see from the looks of it, this really is the one from the two special menus which is really not meant to be accessed by end users, but it's actually more user-friendly, because other than this button opening it and closing it, it doesn't interfere with the monitor, because you can use the regular menu even though you have the factory menu enabled, which is just great. It only opens if you push the exit button without the OSD being otherwise activated. So that's great, that's good. There's a lot of options here, which I'm not gonna cover. OD gain. This is the interesting part for us. by default it's on 42, and I'll show you what this changes. So I'm gonna pursue some UFOs here on the test UFO site, and you can see that motion blur looks pretty great on this monitor by default, even with blur reduction turned off and just using regular 240 Hz. There's no semblance of ghosting that I can see. I mean, there is a little bit of ghosting, but that is unavoidable with 240 Hz. We need 1000 Hz without strobing in order to completely eliminate motion blur for the human eye on a monitor. But this is already pretty clear, as you can see. And you can't even spot the little bit of overshoot there is on camera, most likely. But there's a little bit of, if you can see the behind of the UFO, there's just a little bit of white corona or outline behind the UFOs. It's really only visible if you're looking for it really hard. But, and this is on the high AMA preset. So what I wanted to show you was that I'm gonna turn up Overdrive to the maximum amount. Yes, and then pursue the UFOs. And this way you will be able to see what extreme overshoot looks like. And then I'm gonna lower it down again to below the original amount of 42. Let's say I'll lower it to the absolute minimum, and you can see how ghosting looks on this monitor without any overdrive. So you can play around with the overdrive gain, but even the default of 42 is really great. So I almost see no reason to change it.